What specifically do you believe is the best pathway for ensuring a 100% renewable energy grid to combat climate change? What role do you believe transition fuels such as natural gas and nuclear energy will play in transitioning to this 100% renewable grid?
We have to, this is an existential threat. Again, I know this from my own kids who've been involved with Sunrise. I'm totally behind the Sunrise movement. I'm honored that Saya Amelia Hijabi has endorsed me. She's one of the top national spokespeople of the Sunrise movement. Your generation is leading, and we have to empower you and follow your lead. We need a Green New Deal. We need to put a price on carbon. We need to take money from that and invest in renewables. I am totally against nuclear power. My 11-year-old son will tell you why that's a bad idea. I think we should move to renewables as quickly as possible. We need to have a just transition for the labor movement so that they can be brought into the clean energy economy. We need to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. I think we need to get off of fossil fuels as quickly as we can. We should stop investing in them. We certainly shouldn't be subsidizing the oil and gas industry, which we do now as a federal government. If I'm in Congress, I will fight tooth and nail to end that and instead shift dramatically. We have 10 years to deal with this. We know renewable energy works. We need to expand it, and we can put millions of people to work by building renewable energy. Right in my own district in Fall River and Taunton, we could be building wind turbines. So this is important, and I'm fully behind the Sunrise movement. I was happy to sign the pledge. And I applaud your leadership.
I believe that we need to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. That requires a host of international, national, and state measures. I'm proud to say that I was the first candidate to put forward a comprehensive climate change plan. And I talked about climate change at the nexus of transportation. Transportation here in Massachusetts accounts for 40% of the carbon emissions that are driving climate change. It's also the only sector in Massachusetts that's growing in its carbon footprint. So I put forward a detailed plan building on my deep experience in both the private sector and the public sector working on transportation to reinvent transportation here in Massachusetts, to introduce a new Eisenhower plan, not for highways, but for mass transit. That means all electric regional rail with reliable 15-minute headways throughout the state. That means connected bus rapid transit. That means better infrastructure for cycling and walking. And that means a carbon tax nationally to help fund that infrastructure. That is going to be a challenging vote, but it's a necessary vote. And any politician who thinks that climate change is an existential threat, as I do, but who is not willing to put a price on carbon, I don't think is being serious about the challenge that we face. And I commit that I will support a carbon tax towards that end. And I think, hopefully this goes without saying, but I would also, of course, support us re-entering the Paris Agreement, which is the most important and most effective multilateral agreement that we have in place to combat climate change. It's not going far enough, but it's the best that we have right now. And hopefully under a President Biden, we'll be able to take strides even beyond that.
Yeah, so I care deeply about environmental justice. Not only did I spend way too much time in the woods, but I also founded the Cleveland Heights Bicycle Coalition. I'm car-free, I'm vegetarian, so I really believe that at a personal level. But then there's this huge societal issue. And so I'm concerned that many liberals focus way too much on policy. And so you see like the Green New Deal, which is great in theory. If we could pass it, I'd just be happy to see that we have some sort of consensus in our government about this, but we can't. But the Green New Deal is non-binding. It doesn't actually pass any laws. So there wouldn't be actually any change even if we did pass it. And we have a lot of people talking about policy and carbon tax, but the real issue is the fact that we now have a government and a system where we have corporations like the Koch brothers who are funding the Americans for Prosperity. We have a system that has opened the floodgates to corporations being able to lobby our government and to influence our politics. And so it's kind of a zigzag path where I'm actually going to say, look, I fully support these green policies, but I really believe that first, before we address it, we need to address Citizens United and to actually make sure that we have a clean and fair and reasonable funding system for our political candidates. And we currently do not. So
thank you for that question, because climate change is an existential crisis. It is the crisis of our generation. It is a crisis that we need to solve. I'm a mom of 3 young kids, and I cannot allow for a future that doesn't think about what planet and what we are leaving for them. So transition to renewable energy not only makes sense economically, it also makes sense from a health perspective. I've done a lot of research and worked with governments across the world in my job at the United Nations, trying to shift directly to wind, to solar. And for Massachusetts, offshore wind is a possibility. It can provide renewable energy and can do it through a just transition. And by just transition, I mean thinking about the workers, thinking about who's being displaced and what we do about that. Now, your question about transitioning through gas, I do think that we don't have to go that way. The economic case for going directly to renewables and not needing to go through transition fuels is there. In some countries of the world, that might not be the case, but in this country, in the US, in Massachusetts, we can get to 100% renewable energy without having to think about transition fuels.
So I'm all in for the Green New Deal. I think we need to get to 100% renewable economy, and I have been beating that drum long before I was running for the United States Congress. I headed up the climate action efforts in Brookline when I was on the select board there, and as the head of the socially responsible business group here in Massachusetts for the past 5 years, had signed 100% renewable pledge from a business organization. Pretty important. There's no question that we need to make this transition as quickly as possible, while recognizing that in the 4th Congressional District, there are jobs that are tied to natural gas and older ways of fueling our economy. That doesn't mean that we don't prioritize making that transition. It just means that we have to do it in a just way. I think we need to prioritize investing in the infrastructure that's going to be necessary for us to fully transition to 100% renewable. That includes investments in storage and transmission. I look at Massachusetts as a place that has been working toward a Green New Deal for more than a decade. If you look at what happened in the Patrick administration, where I had the privilege of serving, we invested in a clean energy economy and were able to create over 100,000 jobs in a virtually brand new industry. I want to say one other thing about clean energy and tackling climate crisis. If we aren't including transportation in this conversation, we are doing it wrong. Obviously, a transition to a clean economy and 100% renewables is vital, but in Massachusetts, the transportation sector is the single biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in our Commonwealth, and that's true in many other states. If we aren't investing in public transportation, in improving the T, the commuter rail, South Coast Rail, regional transit authorities in Attleboro, Taunton, Fall River, then we are failing to tackle this crisis. So yes, yes, yes to clean energy, but we can't leave out transportation in the conversation.
So I think that climate change is certainly outside of our current economic and healthcare crisis, at the very top of our list of issues that we have to deal with. This is a legacy issue, frankly, for the older generations, what we leave to the younger generations. I am a graduate from MIT. I am a data person, and the data tells us that we must act aggressively and we must act in a broad-based way. Certainly driving increased use of renewables is a major component of that, but there are other areas that we have to invest in, not just in clean energy, but in remediation, because we've already damaged our climate to a great extent. We've got to start reversing that damage. So I believe that there should be a comprehensive Apollo moonshot type program driven by the federal government to drive investment, creativity, and innovation in not just clean energy, but remediation and conservation. Relative to the grid itself, this is coming from the business world. I can tell you this will take a long time. And we've got to make sure that we address the remediation and the conservation side as well as we're driving in that direction. I think we should drive that way. The government can provide incentives and also incentives to businesses in terms of carbon pricing to enable that transition and drive that transition. I think we should do that. Relative to what sort of transitional fuels, I think that, again, this is an area where the government can drive innovation. Certainly in the areas of nuclear fuel, there are some interesting areas to invest in to make it safer and safer, to make it an important component of our program to get to renewable infrastructure, but most importantly, the end product of a climate that is beginning to reverse from the bad effects of the past few decades.
Yeah. So, well, not to be glib, but three words is the answer to the first part of the question, and it's Green New Deal. I think that the Green New Deal is one of the best ideas to come out of the Democratic Party in some time, and I think it's a good reminder. I hear all the time, oh, the 4th Congressional District in Massachusetts, that's a safe blue seat. That doesn't really matter. And I think that that's just wrong. The Green New Deal is a perfect example. That's a senator from Massachusetts and a member of Congress from New York who co-sponsored that legislation and changed the conversation around this issue. And look, I think the lesson there is it changed the conversation, and it's the direction that we need to go in. It lays out, here are the things we need to do, and here are the goals. But it leaves it up to us to figure out the hows. And I think that gets at the second part of your question, which is sort of, how do we get there? What are we going to do to lead on this? One of my favorite statistics is that in Massachusetts, so there are 50,000 coal jobs left in the entire country, total 50,000 coal jobs. We hear about those a lot. There are 110,000 clean energy jobs in Massachusetts alone right now. And Massachusetts is wonderful, it's my home, but it's not the biggest state in the country. So clearly we're doing something right when it comes to the green economy. And I think we really need to triple down on those investments right now. And, you point out a question about transitional fuels. I know that some of my opponents are swayed with those and into those. I think that the lesson from opposing pipeline construction, as I did in the Attorney General's office, we were on those fights, is that these are massive investments. I mean, an investment in a nuclear power plant, that's a multi-billion-dollar long-term investment. And I think, all it does is really delay the investments that we need to keep making in these growth industries of clean energy. And we have all the pieces in place, and we are perfectly situated. The Port of Fall River, second deepest water port in New England, it is perfectly situated to be the leader in Atlantic offshore wind. We've got places like the Draper Factory in Hopedale and the Brayton Point in Somerset, perfect situated for the clean economy and for good, high-paying jobs and union jobs as well. So, look, I think we just need to expand and double down on these investments. We need to get Donald Trump out of office so that his EPA isn't ripping up every environmental regulation they get their hands on. And we need to just keep moving forward to build the green economy, to put people back to work, and then, of course, to the point about saving this planet, to actually confront the climate crisis. A lot of people are frustrated, and young leaders in particular, and I share it. I mean, this is a question about whether we will be able to breathe the air and drink the water, and we have to say yes to that question.
Well, the biggest threat that we face is the climate emergency, and that's a real threat, and that's a threat that we need to address head on. And to do that, we need to shift our whole economy from one that's reliant on fossil fuels into one that's relying on renewables. And to do that, the battle is going to be in Wall Street, because as you know, the fossil fuel industry has a lot of representation in our government, and that representation comes from the Wall Street lobby that gives so much in funding to people running for office or people who are in office. So even when you hear from representatives that they do not take money from corporate PACs, ask them, do they take money from corporate lobbyists? My campaign does not take money from corporate lobbyists or fossil fuel executives. And we take our time in vetting people when we receive their donations. And that's because we want to serve the people at 100%. The current pandemic is going to force our government into spending massively in order to create jobs. We need a federal jobs guarantee. We need to create millions of good green jobs to get our workforce back at work. My district has been affected heavily by the climate emergency, either from heat hotspots and elderly dying in the summertime, or from crumbling infrastructure that has caused people to drink dirty water and get sick, or from environmental waste in the most impoverished areas in the district. And in order for us to really hit the climate, address the climate emergency head on, we're going to have to advocate for a green recovery plan post-COVID-19.
Undoubtedly, we are hurtling toward a future where the politics and everyday realities of climate change will overshadow everything else. Our planet is in peril, and we need to finally get serious about fighting back, which is why I strongly support the Green New Deal and believe that we need a national mobilization plan to phase out of fossil fuel use entirely, while overhauling our infrastructure and our transportation system and ensuring environmental justice for frontline communities. This climate emergency also presents a moment for Americans to unite around a common cause and to put millions of people to work with good paying union jobs and to lead an international coalition to safeguard the future for generations to come. And I think that along with that transition away from fossil fuels comes a very important investment in job training and in apprenticeship for those who have been working in those industries for a long time and who can be working in fields like renewables, wind energy and solar, but it's going to require investment from the federal government in helping people to be able to appropriately make those transitions and adopt new roles. And as a member of Congress, that's what I'm going to advocate for.
Well, hopefully as little as possible. I think nuclear energy is really dangerous. I'm a double E, and the nuclear fuel is just a million-year dangerous waste problem that we just really can't even comprehend. It's so bad. So natural gas, as much as we need to use it to transition, I do support the Green New Deal, and I support paying for it with capital gains reform and increased taxes on people who can afford to pay.
Look, I don't think there's one pathway to it. I think it actually is very similar to my answer when it comes to the opiate. You need a holistic approach to combat the climate crisis, right? And it has to start, Cameron, it has to start with combating environmental racism and injustice. It needs to start with that. You have to move away from fossil fuels. You have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have to re-enter our leadership perch globally and re-enter the Paris Accords. You need to renew in solar and in wind, and you need to have incentives for companies and individuals to purchase clean energy appliances, construction materials, and vehicles. And even more so, we know that 40% of our carbon emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions, are coming from transportation. So we need to have a system that's energy efficient and it's effective, and it means upgrading all of the machinery that we need in that. Having high-speed rail, but having high-speed rail that takes people effectively from their places of home to their places of work. All these pieces need to be together, including, quite honestly, and we're seeing a lot more of that now under COVID-19, but smart transportation, having bike paths and having walking paths that are integrated amongst all the different communities. Finally, I think you need to have a carbon tax, and you need to have a cap and trade. I mean, these are really important issues that are all together. Not one thing's going to get us to where we need. We need everyone working together.